Hi, everyone. This is John Daly again. I'm here with Bernie Goldberg for another episode of the No BS Zone. How are you doing, Bernie?
Just fine, John. How about you?
I'm doing good, thank you. So today we'll be talking about a few different topics. The first one is about cable news networks. Now, you've written a lot about how cable news has very much runs off of a business model these days and not a journalistic model. These networks very much cater to what their partisan audiences want to hear. But CNN is under their new president, Chris Licht. Chris Licht, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but he took over from Jeffrey Zucker. He's been making some changes at the network to try and sort of reorient it around more centrist reporting. Most recently, he let go of some people like Brian Stelter, John Harwood, and Jeffrey Toobin, all, I would argue, sort of politically charged lefty journalists. But so far, CNN hasn't been rewarded with stronger ratings. The ratings have actually continued to drop. What do you think about CNN's new direction? And do you think a cable news network can be successful today by calling things straight?
No, no. Cable news has evolved from when CNN first came on with a straight news all the time format. Cable news has evolved into an opinion platform. People tune into cable news to get their own values, their own biases validated. Cable news rarely surprises anybody watching with an opinion that makes them say, geez, I didn't think of that. The business model is give the audience what the audience wants. And what the audience wants, John, is opinion that they already have. So if CNN wants to go down the road of becoming a hard news, down the middle news organization, they may succeed journalistically, but I can't see how they can succeed if we measure success by ratings.
Right. No, I've been reading. I mentioned this a little bit in an email, but I won't get too heavy into it. But I've been reading a little bit of Chris Direwalt's new book, former Fox News guy on the media. He's been making he makes this point, and he's been making it for some time, that back, a few decades back, when there was the big three networks were doing their national evening news. You were part of that, obviously. You were with CBS during that time, but he always referred to that as broadcasting, broad in the sense where the audience was understood to be this very large, diverse group of Americans, millions and millions of them. But Starwell says the cable news today, they're focused on narrowcasting
Right.
and that they're targeting a much more specific type of viewer, and that networks are studying very closely through digital analytics, these things they didn't have before, decades ago, where they can look down into a 15-minute time segment, or I'm sorry, a 5-minute segment to see what viewers like, what they don't like, and they tailor the shows toward what those viewers like. And it brings up that question again. How does a cable news network that's trying to play it straight, how can they possibly compete with something like that?
Steyerwalt is absolutely correct. It is narrowcasting. Cable has the Golf Channel. The Golf Channel deals with, guess what? Golf. They have a food channel, which deals with food. They have a travel channel. They have a kids channel. They have all sorts of narrow focused groups, and they can make money that way. Cable news is no different, no different. Fox News isn't in business to make Joe Biden look like a good president. MSNBC isn't in business to make Donald Trump look like he makes sense. They're appealing to their audience no differently, John, than the Golf Channel appeals to its audience. We wouldn't expect the Golf Channel to suddenly do stories about birthday cake. That's not what they do. We would be shocked if Fox News had a day-long, week-long, month-long platform where they made Democrats and liberals and progressives look good. That's not what they do. The difference is there's nothing wrong with the Golf Channel focusing on golf. But if you have news in your title, if you're a news channel, you should be doing news. Now, I know each of these channels, I don't think MSNBC has really a news segment, a news evening newscast. CNN does and Fox does. But aside from that, the rest of the day is tilted to the left or to the right. And that's different from having a food channel or a golf channel or a travel channel. News is different. It's fundamentally different. You don't poll the audience to see what kind of news they want. And yet, that's exactly what's happening.
Right. Now, I think you mentioned to me a while back that you watched some of News Nation. There's sort of more of a startup cable network at this point. I would say probably maybe a bit more of a handle on things than maybe what would be considered a startup. But I've watched a little bit of it. I don't watch a lot of cable news anymore, just for all the stuff that drives me nuts. But they, while they have a lot of components of some of the other networks where they get a little animated at times, the hosts, a little bombastic even at times, but there does seem to be this legitimate effort at play to present both sides of the story and have two different voices of opposing sides that we used to see on some of the other networks. I mean, the Fox News used to have, I remember on the O'Reilly Factor, he would have lefties on all the time, Bill would, and talk to them. So yeah, I do see some elements of that. What are your thoughts on News Nation? You talked about it a bit before.
Even when News Nation has both sides of the argument on, they have them on at the same time, but they don't have them on arguing against each other. They don't have them yelling at each other. It isn't a food fight. It's, Mr. X, what do you think about this? Madam Y, I know you disagree. Tell me why you disagree. It's civil. It's grown up. And yet, I'm a big fan, by the way. And yet, we know about Fox. We know about CNN. We know about MSNBC. How many people know about News Nation? Now, maybe over time, they'll find their place. But as I said at the outset, John, cable news has evolved to be an opinion platform, a place where you go to get your own opinion spoken back at you, where you could look at the TV and say, yeah, Biden's a jerk. Yeah, that's right, Sean, he's a jerk, That's not what News Nation does. And I think just as CNN will have a very difficult time trying to become a straight news organization and maintain ratings, I don't think they will. I don't even think Chris Licht thinks they will. But News Nation can't become Fox News unless it throws red meat at the audience. Now, you could argue, aren't there enough people who want a fair, balanced, here's one side and here's the other with no yelling and screaming? I don't think there are. Not the people who are watching Fox News. I don't think that's why cable news. I don't think that's why they do watch cable news.
No, I think that's right. And one more part of the story, that we haven't talked about yet, though I know we talked about it in the past, is the TV, presentation to begin with. A lot of people, and I'm one of them these days. I don't watch a lot of cable news, and a lot of that's because I get my stuff off the internet. I found outlets that I like, podcasts that I like that I think are informative. I'm a big fan of the Dispatch, Stephen Hayes, Jonah Goldberg's. I think they do a great job over there. I read a lot of other places as well. But yeah, it's you wonder just that the whole TV presentation, is sort of in slow decline, and it's been that way for a while.
Well, it's become subscriber based, so that even the New York Times, which was, the Bible, now it's simply the liberal Bible, the liberal gospel of news, because the New York Times gets its money basically from subscriptions, not from, they used to have full page ads from Tiffany's and all that. Now they make their money appealing to liberals who want a liberal take on the news. They would argue, in fairness, that they don't give a liberal take on the news, they give the news. Okay. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but the reason I don't read the New York Times as much as I used to is I just don't like when my head explodes, you know? I'm funny that way. But the New York Times has subscriptions for people who basically are liberal and progressive who like that. And that's what a lot of internet sites are like too. I run a conservative site, but it's a conservative site that doesn't yell and scream at the other side. I never called Joe Biden a doofus. The worst thing I ever said about him was that he's sitting in the back seat while somebody else is driving the car, and back there he's eating a cookie. That's what he's doing. He's not running the show. He's not driving the car. That wasn't nice, but that's as bad as I've gotten. But everything, it seems to me, is aimed at a niche audience. And it's not just the Golf Channel or the Food Channel. It's not only CNN and MSNBC and Fox. It's also the New York Times. They're not appealing to a lot of conservatives. That's not who's subscribing to the New York Times. And I think for the foreseeable future, that is the future.
I think that's right. It's you bring up this the point about these niche audiences, these very different audiences. When that happens, it's tough to find a lot of common ground when you're talking about politics, because one side is hearing only about certain stories and the other side is hearing about a different type or completely different view of certain stories. And nobody, when I write a column for your website, and a lot of times I get these weird, what about responses in the comment section about stuff. I'm like, I don't even know what they're talking about. And I assume that this is stuff that has been pounded hard on, Tucker Carlson or some of the other shows, but in some of the people reading the comments, or reading my columns, think this is just some like great comeback again. And it rarely has anything to do with anything I'm writing about. But yeah, it's just you almost have to look in and see, okay, what's this person talking about? Where are they coming from? How does this relate to what I just said? It really is like two different languages.
The internet has democratized information and response to information. Now, you could argue that's a good thing, because the people who didn't have access to weigh in on what the New York Times was saying or what CBS News was saying, now they can go on the internet if they have a computer and a modem, and they could tell John Daly or anybody else what they think. There are good things about that. The bad stuff is, and I've written the same thing as you have, I write about a column and somebody says, well, what about Hillary Clinton? I didn't say anything about Hillary Clinton. I didn't say anything that a reasonable person could wonder, what about Hillary Clinton? And I'm wondering, what the hell are they reading? Did they read what I just wrote? The answer is they may have read it. Technically, they may have read it. But what's going on in their head is something else altogether. So the democratization of information is partially good. It gives people who didn't have a voice, but it also lets the crazies have a voice and weigh in on stuff that isn't even on the table when they're weighing in on it. I mean, seriously, I've laughed at some of the comments I've gotten when I write a piece and I say, I didn't write about that. No reasonable person could have thought I wrote about that. And to make it even more simple, I wrote bias, about liberal bias in the news. When I say something about conservative bias, I get comments from geniuses who say, you're just a knee-jerk liberal. Really? Really? The last liberal I voted for was Jimmy Carter in 1812. That was the last liberal I voted for. How am I a liberal? Well, I'm a liberal to these idiots because I'm not an ideological conservative. I'm a conservative who agrees with conservatives when I agree with conservatives. When I don't, I don't. That's not what a lot of the audience wants from people who are on TV or who write columns or who have a voice on the internet. That's not what they want.
Yeah, that would be great if some of these people did, who maybe aren't as familiar with you, at least did a little bit of a Google search to see what your politics are. You're not really known for being a Hillary defender or an Obama defender, but yet they want you, they assume that because you criticize, when you criticize someone on the right, that must mean you're on the left. And yeah, that's been going on for a while.
And that's the problem, John. We've gone to our respected corners. Conservatives gone to their corner, liberals have gone to their corner. I'm not in the middle. I think Joe Biden is a terrible president. But you know what? I also think Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And I only started thinking that after he lost the election and didn't give up. Until then, I didn't think he was a threat to democracy. Thought he was rude, crude, vulgar, goofy at times. I liked his policies in many areas. But if you're a Trump supporter, you have to think one way. And if you don't like Joe Biden, you have to think another way. And if you do like Joe Biden, you have to think that. That's not good for this country. That's why I've said, and before we move on, let me say it one more time. The biggest problem facing this nation today, I believe, isn't climate, isn't inflation, isn't the southern border, isn't crime. Those are gigantic problems, all of them. The biggest problem is polarization because it's turning Americans against their fellow Americans. Very bad, very dangerous.
And that's a good lead into the next topic, which I'll move on to. We were going to talk about President Biden's now infamous speech a couple weeks ago in Philadelphia with the red imperial background. It looked like something out of Star Wars a little bit. But it was a polarizing speech at a very polarizing time in our nation's history. 2 years ago, when Biden was a presidential candidate, he kind of ran as this guy who was going to lower the temperature, more soft-spoken than we'd seen him earlier in his political career, sort of even diplomatic. He wanted to restore our nation's norms after 4 chaotic years of Trump. But that's definitely not what he did with that speech. And you have some thoughts on why.
Yeah, Joe Biden, for almost all of his entire adult life, has been a politician. He is a politician. Politicians behave like politicians. They don't behave like statesmen. Joe Biden behaved like a politician in that speech. And he did it to deflect attention from his own failures. He talked about MAGA Republican extremists because he doesn't want to talk about his failure to control inflation, crime, the chaos on the southern border. I would have been okay with the speech, which I agreed with in parts, if he had gone a step further. My problem was with what he didn't say. For instance, he talked about how violence is never acceptable and it's a threat to democracy. He's right. He's right. But he didn't talk about the left-wing violence in 2020, in May and June of 2020. He didn't talk about that violence. Why not? He talked about how it's a threat to democracy when MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump don't accept election results when they lose. He's right. But Democrats don't accept election results when they lose either. From George W. Bush's presidency on, they've challenged every Republican victory through Donald Trump. And Stacey Abrams, who's currently running for governor of Georgia, hasn't conceded that she lost 4 years ago and says the election was rigged. Hasn't conceded, says the election was rigged. That sounds familiar. Who else has said that? And yet Joe Biden didn't talk about that. There's one other thing I made a note here. Oh, he talks about how MAGA Republicans and their candidates are a threat to democracy. Okay, you can make that case. But his party is supporting those MAGA Republicans, the most extreme MAGA Republican candidates, hoping they win because they'll be easier, he figures, to defeat in the general election. How is that not a threat to democracy? And he didn't say a word about that. He hasn't told Democrats to stop spending millions and millions of dollars supporting those extreme Republicans. He hasn't said a word about it. So, Mr. President, I understand that you're a politician. I understand you're not a statesman. I understand you're going to behave like a politician. Just do us one big favor. Spare us the high-minded sanctimony in your speeches, because it's very difficult to take you seriously when you're sanctimonious and high-minded, when all you are is being political to deflect attention to the MAGA Republicans from your own failures.
No, that's a very
say about that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I've written about that quite a bit. The Democrats helping out the MAGA Republicans in these GOP primaries. I think last time I looked, it was over something like $40 million.
$40 million. $40 million. And it's still going on. I mean, as I speak, it's still going on.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's worked in some places. Peter Meyer in Michigan, he lost very closely. He was one of the Republicans that voted to impeach Trump, and his opponent, this MAGA guy that Trump endorsed, he hardly had any money that he was putting into the race of his own, and this group came along and really helped him.
And let me ask you a question, John, and everybody listening to us. What if that? Sorry.
That's all right.
What if that person wins? What if that MAGA extremist Republican wins? Then the Democrats have helped elect somebody they say is a threat to democracy. Right? Think about that. They will have helped somebody they say is a threat to democracy. So, Mr. President, please don't tell us how you're so worried about threats to democracy when your own Democratic Party, or at least supporters of your Democratic Party, people with money who support Democrats, are supporting MAGA Republicans. Please, the hypocrisy is too much for me. I can't take it.
No, I hear you. It's funny too, because you hear these, and I know Biden's done this, but I hear this a lot from Nancy Pelosi, where they make the point, why don't more Republicans, speak out and stand up against Trump? Well, there are people that actually voted to impeach him, 10 in Congress, some in the Senate, and these have been among the people that the Democrats have then, because after they did speak up in a big way, voting for impeachment, they went after them in the primary and are getting them kicked out of politics. So yeah, it's just.
This is why most reasonable people can't take politicians seriously. In this case, in this particular case, although he doesn't have a monopoly on this, we can't take Joe Biden seriously. He makes a highfalutin speech full of high-mindedness and sanctimony about how patriotic Americans can't support threats to democracy. And yet that's exactly what his party is doing, and he says nothing about it.
True. So let's go move on to the last topic. So the midterms are coming up. You've written about how that big red wave that everyone was talking about a few months ago doesn't look, at this point anyway, to be so big or so red anymore. Though we still have a couple months, things can definitely change. We have seen some tightening in some races. Herschel Walker's been doing a little bit better lately, and some other races have tightened up a little bit. What are your overall thoughts right now on the November midterms?
Well, first of all, November is a million years away. In the world of politics, 2 months is eternity. So let's get that straight. Let's get that on the record. In the beginning of summer, we heard the word tsunami a lot. It wasn't just a red wave. It was going to be a tsunami. Democrats were going to get hit so hard they wouldn't know, excuse the way I'm putting this, they would get hit so hard they wouldn't know what hit them. We don't hear tsunami so much anymore. The race is tightened. In generic ballots, Democrats are doing much better. In some cases, they're leading Republicans. How much that counts, we'll know on November 8th. Races have tightened, as you correctly say. I think abortion is one big issue. very big issue, I believe. Quality of candidates, as Mitch McConnell has put it, is another issue. Donald Trump endorsed some people who were good at winning primaries, but we'll see how good they are at winning general elections. In a couple of states, New Hampshire and Arizona, the governors who would have been strong Senate candidates to unseat Democrats didn't even run because they didn't want to get involved in having to be asked, do you support Trump unilaterally, unequivocally, and all that? They didn't want to get into that mess. Republicans had a good chance of winning the Senate. I don't think they have that good or maybe any chance of winning the Senate now. I'm not making predictions. I'm just saying their chances have decreased. So if they lose the House, then they have to confront Donald Trump. And then they have to confront their future. So I think they'll win the House. But if they win it by less than 25 seats, as I said last time around, that's nothing to brag about. That's about average. No question, the race is tightened, or seems to have tightened. And never underestimate the power of Republicans. And excuse the cliche that's coming, to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yep. And I think both parties have a pretty solid history these days of being able to do that. So, yeah.
I am not predicting defeat. I am not predicting Democrats will hold the House and the Senate. Please, if that happens, if that doesn't happen, don't come and say you got it all wrong. All I'm saying is it doesn't look as promising for Republicans today as it did in June.
No, I think that's true. So let's go ahead and wrap it up there. I wanted to thank everyone again for tuning in to the No BS Zone. We always appreciate that, and we enjoy reading your feedback. And if you have any suggestions, including on topics, let us know in the comment section. Bernie, anything else you'd like to add today?
Just want to thank everybody as you just did, and as I always say, please tell your friends about us.
Excellent. And we are, I'm looking. I haven't actually talked to Bernie much about this lately. I am looking at some things for the membership where you could perhaps make it easier to share what we're doing with other people who you think might be interested in this sort of content. So be watching for that in the mailings that go out. So Bernie, thanks again for doing this. I always enjoy talking to you. So you have a great day. Okay.
Back at you, John. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.